All right, thank you everyone for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully some more will filter in as we get started. So my name is Jordan Carter. I am the Clinical Program Director at our San Diego PHP IOP program. So it is an outpatient program. Today we'll be talking about parenting styles. Before we go ahead and jump into that, I just want to give a little bit of information about Evolve and what we do here. So here at Evolve, we treat adolescents, 12 to 17-year-olds, who are struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues. So we see a lot of kids come through our doors that have depression, anxiety. Usually, a lot of them have a suicide attempt in their history, maybe some self-harming behaviors, as well as substance abuse and different behavioral issues. At Evolve, we have 3 different levels of care. We have our residential treatment center, which is a live-in residential center. And then our partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient programs, those are within our outpatient model. At Evolve, we use multiple different therapeutic interventions. We are a DBT-focused program, but we also use different things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, relapse prevention, solution-focused, and motivational interviewing. At Evolve's residentials, it is a 24-hour support and supervision, so clients will live there for about 30 to 60 days and get very, very intensive treatment. They'll have 3 individual sessions per week, as well as 2 family sessions per week. They have group therapy and psychoeducation 4 times daily, and there is time for school. So the residential treatment is very intensive, as well as very, very helpful. At our outpatient, the PHP and IOP, we have 2 different levels of care within that system. The first one is partial hospitalization, the PHP, which is a full day of programming 5 days per week. This will include a lot of group therapy as well as psychoeducation daily. We also provide academic support, so we are able to have kids who are in school while providing some of that support. When kids are here with us, they get 1 or 2 individual sessions per week, as well as 1 family therapy session. And then we also do have a psychiatrist, so they will be seeing a psychiatrist weekly as well. For the IOP programs, that's a minimum of 3 hours per day, 3 to 4 times per week, depending on the level of care needed by that particular client. So just like with our PHP kids, they will have a lot of group therapy and psychoeducation daily. They'll also meet with our psychiatrist weekly. They'll also have 1 family session per week. They do get 1 individual therapy session per week as well. So now on to the presentation. So again, my name is Jordan Carter. I am the Clinical Program Director of our San Diego PHP IOP program. So in terms of questions, I hope you have questions within this presentation. Please use the Q&A box for any questions that you do have or that come up throughout the presentation. If you are having any technical difficulties, please use the chat feature. All right, so some objectives for this presentation is first and foremost to just learn about different parenting styles. Hopefully, once you learn about them, you'll be able to identify your unique way of being a parent. I hope after this too, you can understand how your style impacts your particular child and maybe learn some new ways to move towards a more balanced parenting style. So what even is a parenting style? So essentially, a parenting style is your behavior towards your child, how you have decided to raise your child. It's the different attitudes, patterns, and strategies that you implement. It is your expression of being a parent. And it is the emotional climate between you and your child that builds different interactions. So sometimes your parenting style comes from what you have experienced with your parents. It's essentially the behavior that you want to have towards your child. However, sometimes it can also be affected by a child's temperament. So this might look like a child who has a lot of acting out behaviors, may need some more strict parenting in order to help mold behaviors back into appropriate behavior. Within parenting, and you'll see a lot of this today, is this idea of responsiveness, which is warmth and nurturance, as well as expectations, which is boundaries, limitations, consequences, things of that nature. So there are 4 different types of parenting styles. We have authoritarian, permissive, uninvolved, and authoritative. We will go ahead and get started with the authoritarian style. So this authoritarian style is very, very strict parenting. The emphasis is on expectations. So very high expectations, very low responsiveness. So low warmth, not a lot of nurturance, and not a lot of attention put on emotions. The focus is on discipline, obedience, control, and the expectations being very, very high. Essentially, this is kids need to be seen, not heard. They need to do the things, not necessarily argue about it. So this parent expects orders to be followed without question. There's no talking back. There's no discussing why an expectation or a boundary is set. It just needs to be done. There's control through threats, punishment, and shaming. So if a child does something, there's a threat of something being taken away. If a child makes a mistake that might be age appropriate, there's a big punishment that's set into place. This type of parent will also withhold affection when a child either misbehaves, makes a mistake, or doesn't meet an expectation. So this can show up as a parent not showing any sort of love when a child fails a test, or this can show up as a parent giving a child the silent treatment. This parent also yells often. So there's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of lecturing, there's a lot of shaming that goes into this too, of making a child feel like they aren't good enough for not meeting an expectation. This style also shows no interest in a child's opinions or feelings. Again, it's kids are to be seen, not heard. Kids are to follow orders, not to argue. This type of parenting style can really, really be triggered by a child's temperament. So again, if a child has very big acting out behaviors, if they have dangerous behaviors, if they're punching walls, it makes a lot of sense to be much more strict with your boundaries, with your expectations, than if a child just has a very mild temperament. Examples of what this would look like would be a parent saying, "Because I said so," when a child asks about why a boundary is there. There's a lot of yelling, a lot of shouting, and a lot of lecturing. Again, when a child misbehaves or makes any mistakes, again, this could be age appropriate mistakes, but they get lectured as to why what they did was wrong. Again, it's the silent treatment, withholding that affection. Kids really learn that their parents' love is conditional because parents use their affection and love as punishment or as reward. Oftentimes, these parents will explode in anger towards a child. They feel so angry that their expectations were not met. They have a tendency to not be able to control their own emotions. I don't care how you feel, just do as I say. If a child responds back with, "I don't feel like doing that," I don't care how you feel, just get it done. They also use a lot of you statements and a lot of blaming. So a child is at fault for a parent's anger. "You made me do this. You made me act this way because you failed a test." So the impact that this parenting style tends to have on kids is much higher rates of shame, guilt, and humiliation with these kids. Because they never feel like they can meet their parents' expectations, because they feel like they're always falling short, and because they always feel like they're in trouble, they have feelings of insecurity and inadequacy, which really develops a negative view of self. These parents' emotions take priority over their kids' emotions, which then has those kids internalize other people's emotions because they're used to being the one that has been blamed for their parents' emotional states. They tend to think that anytime someone is around them who is mad, that it's their fault. They see themselves as the reasoning for other people's emotions a lot of the time. These kids will often shut down and they're not capable of expressing their emotions appropriately, which will result in acting out and externalizing behaviors. Things like that would be a child who's very disruptive in class. It would be a child who's lashing out in anger, punching walls. Substance abuse is very, very high because kids use substances to help calm their emotions because they don't know how to express them. A lot of these kids are unable to make decisions for themselves because they haven't been engaged in conversations around why certain decisions are being made, why boundaries are set, or why punishments are being put in place. They are unable to understand consequences and oftentimes get in trouble. They don't have their own moral compass because, again, they haven't been engaged in the conversation as to why certain things are inappropriate or appropriate. And because of that, they become very good liars to avoid consequences. They don't at all want the yelling or the shaming that has happened within their life, so they yell to get out of consequences. And fortunately or unfortunately, as parents, we model behavior to our kids. So if we're having low empathy for them, if we're yelling at them, if we're bullying them, they tend to take that on too. So a lot of these kids have low empathy for others, and they themselves become bullies because it's what they've seen and it's what they've experienced. There's also a lot of emotional distance within this family, especially because a lot of these kids feel like it's unfair. There's no space to talk about their emotions, which then builds resentments towards parents. Moving on to the permissive style. So this is essentially the complete opposite of an authoritarian parent. This is very, very high responsiveness, very high warmth, very high nurturance, and very low expectations. Not a lot of boundaries, not a lot of limits, no consequences set. These parents are afraid to set their limits. Even if they have expressed limits, they tend not to reinforce them. They have a high emphasis on a child's happiness, which then the emphasis becomes on their happiness, their freedom, and not on responsibilities. So there's no chores, no responsibilities around the house, especially if a child gives any amount of pushback. So these parents back down when a child throws a fit, when a child tantrums, or when a child just expresses any amount of unhappiness. This parenting style is very in alignment with enabling behavior. So because they're not putting consequences in place, they're essentially allowing bad behavior to happen, even destructive behavior to happen. They don't provide any amount of structure or schedule. There's no curfew setting, there's no bedtime routine, there's no morning routine, there's no expectation for a child to have any amount of structure. And they tend to take on the friend role, thinking that they would prefer their child to actually talk to them as opposed to not talking to them. So they also don't discourage kids from making poor decisions because they really don't want to ruffle any feathers. They want to keep that connection with their kid. They want that warmth, they want that nurturance, but they don't want to ruffle any feathers or make their child unhappy in any sort of way. So an example of this would be the cool mom. The mom that is just allowing kids to do what they want, not a lot of supervision, but very warm, very, very kind. The mentality is kids will be kids. It's okay if they make a mistake. You know how kids are, different things like that. This is also a very indulgent parent, so they do not say no. When a child is in a store asking for a new outfit, a parent very unlikely will not say no. They allow their kid to skip school even if they don't feel like going. So there's not a lot of expectation for a child to actually show up, for a child to have achievements and set goals. Oftentimes, if a child wakes up and says, "Oh, I feel a little sad today, I don't want to go to school," this parent won't make them go to school. They might even take them to go get their nails done, which then also reinforces a lack of boundaries, a lack of structure. Again, this parent doesn't set a curfew, and they often turn a blind eye to substance abuse. Again, it's that mentality of kids will be kids, they're going to experiment, that's age appropriate, it's whatever. And then they also let kids do whatever they want because they care so much about their happiness, they care so much about their self-esteem, that they just want them to feel good in whatever it is that they're doing. The impact of this parenting style means that kids will often struggle academically. There's not a lot of expectation or emphasis placed on academics. Their depression can be very high, their anxiety can be very high. They can actually also have certain health issues, things like obesity, cavities, because again, this is the indulgent parent. You're in a store, a kid's going to throw a tantrum if you don't buy them the candy, you don't have a bedtime routine. This is going to create those cavities and create those bad habits of just wanting anything and everything right now. Higher rates of underage drinking, because again, it's the cool mom, the mom that turns a blind eye to substance abuse. And because kids are so used to getting what they want in the moment and parents not saying no, kids will often become very demanding and very selfish, and therefore also struggle in certain social situations that require cooperation, that require sharing. They have high impulsivity, and they definitely tend to be aimless because they haven't had the guidance, because they haven't had boundaries set around them. They don't really know which direction to go. They lack awareness of other people's boundaries too, because they're so used to being able to walk over their parent just by throwing a tantrum. And they have low achievement and low self-control. When they feel something, when they want something, they want it now, but they're not able to go out and get it for themselves oftentimes. They also make poor decisions, and they can't really keep their own good habits. So the uninvolved parenting style. This is a parent that has low expectations, no boundaries, no consequences, no goals set for kids to achieve, as well as no warmth and no nurturance. This parent has little awareness of anything that's going on with their child, and they're not very interested in what their child is actually doing or any of the activities. They're indifferent to their child's emotions. Doesn't matter if their child's happy, doesn't matter if their child's sad, they're just indifferent to them. They don't devote any time or energy to meeting a child's needs. They may be meeting the needs of a child, the basic needs, food, shelter, water, but nothing beyond that. Sometimes parents struggle to even meet those needs of food, shelter, and water, which becomes a neglectful parent. These parents lack attachment to their child, therefore their child lacks attachment to them. There's no boundaries, no rules, no consequences, and no awards. So even if a child gets a good grade on a test, there's no reward for that. Excuse me. Even though these parents tend to be neglectful or uninvolved, it's not always intentional. These parents can be the parents that have high stress jobs, are working really hard. Maybe they also had a parent pass away that's been very difficult for them. Maybe they're dealing with another child who has really bad behavior issues. So a lot of their energy can be taken away and not placed on this specific child. Sometimes it is intentional. Sometimes parents prefer to put energy on their own social life and their own affairs. Examples of this would be showing little interest when your child comes home from school and wants to show you their artwork, or not going to any of your child's soccer games. It's not listening when your child talks about their day. Maybe you're more interested on being on your phone. If this kid skips school, there's not any sort of care, there's not any sort of concern. And this parent does not know any of the child's friends or their teachers. It's okay for them to go to little Susie's house, but they have no idea who Susie is. It's not helping a child with their homework, even if they're struggling. And this parent is not going to be your PTA parent. They're not going to be really at any school functions. They're not going to be the soccer mom. They're not going to be the bake sale mom. They're just not really interested or not really involved in what is going on in this child's life. This parent might be the parent that maybe does actually show up to a soccer game, but again, they're preoccupied on their phone. And this parent will also let kids do whatever they want, but in opposition to the permissive parent that cares too much, this parent doesn't care enough. So this child is really left to their own devices to do whatever they want because the parent is so uninvolved. So the impact of this would be kids with low self-esteem. It's really hard for kids to have high self-esteem if their parent seems uninterested in them. They struggle in school and academically because they don't really have that person there that's there to help them. They do become very self-reliant because, again, they are left to their own devices. They have to make means for themselves a lot of the time. And so they do rely very heavily on themselves, which then can also create social isolation. They're much more used to being by themselves, so it feels comfortable, it feels okay. They know that they can rely on themselves. This child is also one that just flies under the radar. Because they can be self-reliant, they don't ask a lot of other people, so they can be the one that kind of just skirts by. They really, really have a hard time regulating and coping with their emotions because they haven't ever had the arena to talk about their emotions. They haven't ever seen their parent engage with them in an emotional conversation. And because of that, they don't have an emotional connection with their parent, so they struggle to connect in other relationships as well. Now, the authoritative style. This is kind of the gold standard of the parenting styles. So this is high expectations, high responsiveness. Again, complete opposite to the uninvolved. So this parenting style has high expectations of kids. They have boundaries, they have structure, they have limits, but they're also pairing that with a lot of nurturance, a lot of warmth, a lot of guidance. This parenting style is firm, yet it's also very, very nurturing. They have very clear, very consistent expectations, very clear and consistent boundaries. So a child always knows what to expect if they cross a boundary. This parent does not use shaming, does not use punishments or threats in order to try and mold behavior. Instead, they engage with their child. They want to hear their child's opinions and they listen to their child. They can be flexible when needed with the boundaries because they know what's going on with their kid, because they're in attunement and in alignment with their child emotionally. Sometimes they can be a little bit flexible depending on the circumstances. These parents themselves model the behavior they expect from their kids. So if they're expecting their kids to eat a balanced meal, if they're expecting their kids to have emotion regulation, to get homework assignments done, they're doing the same thing. They really, really encourage open and honest discussions. So again, they want the child to be involved in why boundaries are being set, why certain things are happening, why natural consequences are occurring. They use that as really, really good learning moments. They teach their child values, again, by modeling that behavior. So again, these parents are very, very self-aware. They know their own stuff so that they can be the best parent that they can. Examples of an authoritative parent would be setting clear consequences if a child doesn't complete their chores. So a child always knows what to expect if they don't complete their chores. They know what the consequence is going to be. There's structure around curfews. Kids have to be home at a certain time and they have to be in bed at a certain time. These kids have to turn in their phones at a certain time too. They listen to the child as they talk about their day, even if it's repetitive and uninteresting. As much as we love kids, what they have to say about their day isn't always the most riveting conversation, but this parent will make sure that that child feels heard, listened to, and that they're very important. They allow a child to make a mistake and engage that child in discussion about what went wrong. Again, they're using those natural consequences as learning moments. And they validate a child's feelings in response to boundaries being set. So it is okay for a child to be mad at you for setting a boundary. It's okay for a child to not think it's fair that they're getting a consequence, but these parents will validate the fact that it feels unfair. They will validate the fact that they're angry at a boundary being set while also holding those boundaries. So an impact of an authoritative parent is that essentially they're well-rounded people. They're confident in learning new things, they're facing challenges, they're okay with being in new environments because they've had that ability to learn from their parents about different discussions that they've had, while also knowing that there are limits, consequences, and boundaries set up for them in life. They tend to be happy and successful. They have good social skills. They're self-controlled and self-disciplined. They can make decisions from themselves because they've been engaged in those conversations and they've been given guidance from their parents. They're cooperative with their peers. They have confidence in their ability to actually do things. and they tend to be academically successful as well as engaged in school activities like different sports, different bands, and they are independent and they can reason because again, they've had these discussions about why boundaries are there rather than just being told this is the boundary, you need to listen to it. So, which parenting style do you have? As parents, there's going to be different moments and different ways that our child is behaving that's going to elicit different parenting styles, where maybe we might be more authoritarian because, again, our child's acting out, they're punching holes in the wall. So we have to be firm with our boundaries while taking the emotions out of it. Whereas other times, let's say our child is going through a breakup and their best friend just had to go to the hospital for suicidal ideation, it would make sense to be more responsive with the warmth and the nurturance than holding a very high expectation in that moment. So, which parenting style do you have? And does it impact your child? There is another way to think about parenting. So this one I like a little bit more than just trying to fit yourself within a category. This does allude itself to balanced parenting, even though authoritative parenting is a little bit more of that balance. But it really goes into different boundaries with boundaries and attunement. So within that, there's just 3 different ways of parenting. So boundaries with no attunement, no boundaries with attunement, and boundaries and attunement. So I know we've talked quite a bit about boundaries. We'll just go over real quick of what they actually really are. So they're different expectations, rules, they're the rewards, the structure, the limits set on kids, and it's held by enforcing and giving consequences. So boundaries really help kids promote that safety. They know the structure, they know the limits, they know that they have this space to make mistakes. They have learned that if they cross a boundary, there's going to be some sort of consequence with it. So boundaries, again, are just the limits, the rules, the expectations that parents have. Attunement is really getting in tune with a child's emotional state. So this will look like knowing their emotional cues, knowing what's going on with them, responding to them, mirroring back that you can see what it is that they're actually feeling. So you are able to tune into their emotions and you're in step with what's going on with them. It is going to create an emotional attachment between you and the child as well. So they'll be able to kind of feel your emotions too. But it's being present with them, it's being engaged with them, and it's knowing emotionally how they are, as well as fostering emotional development. So boundaries with no attunement. This is going to be very similar to the authoritarian parent, where the expectations are the highest priority. It's the rules, it's the achievement, it's you need to meet these expectations. I don't care really about your emotional needs. This child, again, will often feel inadequate because they don't really ever meet their parents' expectations. They will always feel not good enough, and they'll feel like their parents' love for them is conditional because they have to perform in order to get love. They have to meet a certain expectation in order to get love. They feel like their worth is dependent on what they can and cannot do. Boundaries with no attunement leads to a very big lack of emotional connection between the parent and child, and actually even stunts the child's emotional development. So let's say you have a child who is acting out when they're 17 years old, but emotionally they present as they're 13 because they haven't had the arena to talk about their emotions. This happens often with kids with high expectations and no attunement. It doesn't make sense why they're acting so young, but it is because they haven't had the space to actually talk about how they feel. This really does send the message that emotions are unacceptable. No boundaries with attunement, again, would be similar to the permissive parent. So it's child-centered parenting. The focus is on happiness and self-esteem. Boundaries are removed because they want the child to feel so good. They do not ever want their child to feel sadness, anger, or disappointment. Essentially, they are the center. Their happiness is the center of everyone's world. Their poor behavior oftentimes does get blamed on different things, external factors, and they are not held responsible for their own actions. So this could look like a child who fails a class, the mom saying, well, it's because the teacher didn't like you. It's her fault that you failed the class, as opposed to the child being responsible that they didn't study for the test. They're not held accountable for their actions because that child's happiness and their self-esteem is at the center of this parenting style. That being said, them being the center absolutely fuels narcissism and entitlement in teens. Because their happiness is always the focus, they feel like everything around them should have their happiness at the center of their world. They feel like they get everything they want, so they deserve everything they want. They're not told no ever. And they're not pushed to struggle because parents oftentimes will jump in to rescue. They want to make sure that their child is not feeling anything that isn't happiness or isn't building their self-esteem. So parents will jump in and remove any stimuli that push sadness or push anger. And these kids learn that boundaries are negotiable because these parents don't hold high expectations and they don't hold high standards. These kids learn that if they push hard enough, then the boundary will move. So boundaries with attunement. This is balanced parenting. So there's a few different factors within balanced parenting. It's setting boundaries, emotional attunement, reflective listening, validation, and valuing struggle, which we'll go over each one of those. So balanced parenting. This is a quote that's from the book, The Parallel Process. It's a phenomenal book. I highly recommend it. It really dives deep into what balanced parenting looks like. But I'm just going to read this quote. Limits discourage a child's poor behavior, not her emotion. Likewise, acknowledging your child's emotion doesn't mean dismantling limits. The trick is finding the balance. So balanced parenting is all about having limits and having attunement. So it's these two things that feel like sometimes they're opposing, existing at the same time. All right, so I know we've talked so much about boundaries and attunement, so we'll just go over how to just even do those in general. So balanced parenting, setting those boundaries. How do you set boundaries? Sometimes it can feel really, really difficult to even put boundaries in place, but first and foremost, they need to be clear and they need to be firm, so not negotiable. They are flexible when needed because, again, life happens and sometimes that boundary is going to need to move based off of what is happening around us. However, they are consistent when they don't need to be flexible. So kids know that what the boundary is, they're clear on what the consequence is, and they know that it's going to stay there. This is providing kids with structure. It's providing kids with schedules, those bedtime routines, those curfews, those turning in electronics at a certain time. Kids know that this is going to happen and they can rely on that. And if it doesn't happen, they know what the consequence is. Emotional attunement is just being present with your child, being engaged, being curious, asking questions, listening to a child's feelings, their different opinions, and tuning into their emotional cues. So, reflective listening, another factor of balanced parenting. So if you're in an emotional attunement with your child, your first step is likely going to be reflective listening. So reflective listening is hearing what your child's saying and essentially just reflecting it back to them. It shows them that you're actually listening and that you're actually hearing what they're saying and that you're understanding what they're saying. So it's intentionally paying attention to their emotional feelings as well as their emotional cues. And it's tuning in to their nonverbal and their verbal communication. So let's say they might not have the wording to say exactly what it is they're feeling, but you can see that they're feeling shame or humiliation or upset. So you can always help provide those verbal cues of what's going on when they don't have the actual wording for it. This is responding to your child, not reacting. So in responding, you're taking in what you're hearing from them, you're digesting it a little bit, and then you're responding back rather than just reacting. So if your child says that they feel depressed, you're not in reaction mode to try and panic about them feeling depressed. You're digesting it and creating space for both of you to respond. You're also not jumping in to fix it, because trying to fix it right away is not actually listening. And you're sending the message that feelings are something that need to be fixed right here, right now, as opposed to just problem solving and working through it. So you just mirror back what you hear someone say and what you hear and how they're feeling. So ways to do this would be, what I hear you saying is you feel blank, sad, angry, discouraged. It sounds like you're feeling discouraged. Can you tell me more? So it is also trying to elicit more information. I can see you feel upset. Does that feel right? So again, sometimes kids don't necessarily have the vocabulary to explain what they're feeling. So if you can see that they're feeling something, throwing it out there and seeing if you got it right, it shows interest in your child. I want to understand what you're feeling, but it is hard to understand, understand when you are yelling. So sometimes, as I'm sure you know, kids will try and yell at you about how they're feeling about something. And it doesn't create space for you to engage in reflective listening. So letting them know that you do want to know what's going on, but that you need them to not be yelling in order for that to happen. So reflective listening, huge step in emotional attunement and balanced parenting. The next step would be validation. So once you gather that information from reflective listening, you do want to engage in validation. So essentially, you want to validate the feeling that you've reflected that your child is feeling. So it's recognizing and affirming that another person's thoughts, feelings, and experiences have justification, that makes sense sometimes that you would feel that way. It's just acknowledging that things are valid. With validation, you allow someone to feel an emotion. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. It doesn't mean that they're right and you're wrong in how either one of you feels. It just means that feelings are there. It shows understanding. And again, you don't have to agree with it. So rather than your child saying, well, I'm mad at you for taking my phone away, you shouldn't have done that, and you responding back with, well, you shouldn't feel that way, it takes away proving who is right and who is wrong, because it does make sense that your child might be angry that you took their phone away. That makes sense. You don't have to agree with all of the semantics behind it, and you don't have to argue, just validate the anger. So ways in which to do validation. I understand why you would feel angry. That sounds really tough. So you don't have to jump into fix it mode. You just have to say, what you're feeling makes sense. That does sound hard. So another example would be, that's hard. Thank you for sharing with me. Or I'm having a hard time understanding why you felt that way. Can you explain more so I can understand better? Sometimes it doesn't necessarily always make sense to us what some of our kids are feeling. And so just asking for them to explain more might help you get on the same page. And I can imagine how you would feel that way. How are you coping with it now? So again, just creating validity for them and then asking more questions to get to a different place. So reflective listening, validation. Once a child feels seen, heard, understood, and validated, then you can kind of move to the problem solving. But validation and reflective listening need to happen first in order for them to feel emotionally attuned with you and you with them. Another big factor in balanced parenting is valuing struggle. So hardships are going to happen. Hard work is going to need to happen. Setting goals happens. All of these things happen in life. And yet when our child struggles, we tend to want to take it away. And so seeing your child struggle means that you have to be okay with the discomfort that they are going to struggle, that they're going to have unhappy feelings. And that's really, really hard as a parent. It's so hard to watch your child. It is so hard to watch your child be in some sort of discomfort, and yet it's so necessary. So learning and growth happen when you are in struggle, when you are outside of your comfort zone. We create internal feelings of contentment and esteem when we struggle, when we work hard, when we achieve. I'm sure a lot of you have gotten to a place where you've achieved a goal and you have felt so good internally about yourself. So you were able to find that happiness and contentment within you because of the hard work you put in. When kids go through struggle, when kids achieve their own goals, and when they work very hard, they develop their own internal resources to overcome challenges when they present themselves again, because they will, because that's a part of life. These struggles that they go through also help reinforce natural consequences. If we are constantly trying to jump in and rescue and fix things and take away struggle from our children, they won't have the opportunity to learn how to deal with struggle when it does present itself. And they won't have the opportunity to learn how to grow and develop their own problem-solving skills when it's going to be necessary for the future. So in valuing struggle within the balanced parenting umbrella, you come alongside your child so that you're in it with them. You're helping guide them through the struggle as opposed to doing it for them. So examples of this would be allowing a child to get a bad grade even if they haven't studied, as opposed to you reaching out to the teacher to ask for extra credit. It's helping your child train harder if they've been on the bench all season, as opposed to going to the coach and throwing a fit that your child's been on the bench all season. It's having an open discussion about natural consequences so they can learn from struggle. And it's not intervening if your child gets in trouble at school for acting out. You are helping hold them accountable, and you're helping them learn natural consequences and the boundaries of the world. You're helping your child problem solve friend issues as opposed to you jumping in and talking to that other parent about what's going on. You work with your child to set achievable goals and encourage that hard work. So maybe they have a goal of going to med school in the future. You work with your child to set those tiny goals to get them closer and closer to the bigger goal. And you help build mastery. So we're big on building mastery here at Evolve because it really creates a higher self-esteem. It creates confidence in your abilities to face challenges. So this could look like learning a new language, learning a new instrument, trying to run a certain mile in a certain amount of time. It's putting a goal out there that is achievable and working hard to get it. Because when we achieve and when we go through struggle and come out on the other side, we all feel a little bit better. So the impact of balanced parenting. Again, this tends to create a well-rounded child. They learn that their feelings are valid, while often inappropriate behavior is not actually valid. That's not okay. So it validates the feeling while invalidating certain bad behaviors. It allows a child to feel that struggle, but because they can feel that struggle, they will then develop those problem-solving skills that are going to be necessary in their life. And you have provided the guidance to help a child know they're supported and cared for while fostering that independence. Because you're not doing it for them and you're coming alongside them, they feel like they are gaining the skills and the knowledge of how to do it themselves when it does come time for them to do it for themselves. You allow a child to be mad at a boundary and a consequence because that's okay. I don't like consequences. I get mad, but sometimes I have to have consequences. That, again, is just a part of life. And yet those consequences are still going to be there. So again, it validates the feeling while knowing that some certain things are just going to be there. And you help problem solve and alongside them. And then the boundaries and the attunement are so helpful in developing emotional maturity and self-accountability. Because you are creating the space for that emotional attunement to happen between the two of you, your kid will learn emotionally how to regulate their emotions, how to deal with emotions as they arise. And the boundaries help the child learn that self-accountability. So they know where limits are without you having to enforce that. So again, balanced parenting is absolutely on a continuum. There are some times where you're going to need the boundaries with no attunement. And then there are some times where you're going to need the no boundaries with attunement, depending on what's going on. but the hope is to be mostly in the middle, that most of the time you are on this boundaries with attunement in the middle. And yet the seesaw will tilt some certain ways, but we really balanced parenting is going to be the gold standard. Some resources for teens and for families. The Parallel Process, which is the quote that I read, is a great book that I highly recommend. It's very helpful in helping you assess your parenting style, as well as goes a little bit more into depth of what balanced parenting is. Parenting Teens with Love and Logic. They use a few different titles for different parenting styles, but a lot of them are very similar to what we went over today. And then Hunt, Gather, Parent. It's a great book on learning from different cultures of different parenting styles as well. And then, of course, we have our Evolve blog and different digital versions of different resources. All right, well, thank you all. I very much appreciate your time. Again, my name is Jordan Carter. I am the Clinical Program Director of our San Diego PHP IOP program. So if you do have any questions, please do feel free to reach out.